Next up, we will have an architect from Australia, Jeremy Mcleod. He is the founding director of Breathe Architecture, a team of dedicated architects that have built a reputation for delivering high-quality design and sustainable architecture for projects of all scale. Breathe Architecture has been focusing on sustainable urbanisation and have been investigating how to deliver more affordable housing to the people of Melbourne. Jeremy Mcleod believes that through collaboration, architects can drive real positive change in this city we all call home. Jeremy is the recipient of 2016's Leadership in Sustainability Prize at the AIA Australian Achievement in Architecture Awards. To have the ball rolling, let's put our hands together for Jeremy Mcleod.
Thank you. I'm going to talk through, I guess, where I started as an architect. In fact, before that, I'm going to talk about how I started as a human, and then how I evolved into an architect, why I chose architecture. I'm going to talk through the early career of Breathe Architecture and how we thought we could make a difference. And then I'm going to talk about the problems that we faced and, as a practice, what we weren't dealing with and what we were ignoring. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about how we tried to shift gears and think about ourselves, again, as humans, first and foremost, and then secondly, as architects, working within the human context. Through all of this, I'm going to try and show you that as an individual, I'm powerless to change anything. That Breathe Architecture is made of 17 individuals who are all incredible in their own right, and 15 of those are females. All of our leadership team at Breathe are females, and they're young, incredible women. So I think that, I've seen lots of young women here today, and I think that the future looks pretty female to me. Yeah. I met Lillian, the president, yesterday. It's good to see that's the second president you've had that's female. I think that in Australia we're seeing some change in that direction as well. But interestingly, what I've found is that we can do incredible things together. That on our own, we're hindered by our own capacity. But there's an incredible ability for us as a society or as a community to do more things. And so I want to talk about the importance of community through my presentation. But firstly, I would like to see a bit of community in here. Could I please ask everyone to stand up? It's okay, you've just sat down for 60 minutes. It's okay to get up for 30 seconds. You'll be okay. You okay up there? You're all up? Okay, great. Now, yeah, some people are stretching. Now, could you please turn to someone that you don't know and introduce yourself? Tell them what your name is and tell them why you're here. Okay, thank you. You can stay standing up if you want, or you can sit down, it's okay. So I know for some of you that was challenging if you're introverted, if you like your own space, if you like solitude. I know for others of you that are extroverts that was easy. But the important thing is that human connection, talking to someone that you don't know, that leap of faith, engaging with another human is the first step towards community. And it's this species, this planet will survive with us as a community working together, not with us trying to eat each other. Metaphorically, not literally. So I'm going to talk about yesterday. So, yeah, I was born in the 70s. My parents were activists. My father cared deeply about equality around housing. And my parents taught me values around sustainability, around the environment, and around equity and access to housing for everyone. I watched my parents in their struggle to effect change, and the way that they did it was by protesting. So remember, 60s and 70s, it was all about protesting. Lots of people coming together, marching in the streets, closing the streets down, waving banners. And I watched them for years and years protesting, trying to stop things happening. And while it looked incredibly powerful, I saw little political change happening in Australia. And so I thought that perhaps the answer was in taking personal action. So before I studied architecture, I went to study environmental design to learn about systems that could affect better environmental outcomes, that could help in our fight for sustainability. When I finished that, I went on to study architecture thinking that I could take that environmental design into the world of architecture and implement change that way. When I finished architecture, I went to work for an architecture firm. Some of you may know that firm. That firm's name is Fender Katsoulides. Do you know, anyone know Fender Katsoulides? So they're building a 118-storey tower in KL at the moment, yeah? So I come from a background where I care deeply about sustainability. And at that time when I worked for Fender Katsoulides, they'd been doing some incredible small work. There was 8 architects there. I stayed there for 4 years, and as I watched their practice grow into more commercial work, the last project I was working on was an 88-storey tower, and my job was drawing the basement car park. And so I was drawing the basement car park for 6 weeks. I decided to leave Fender Katsoulides and start my own practice, and that practice was called Breathe Architecture. It's not called Breathe because I'm trying to be pretentious. It's called Breathe because I didn't want to call it Jeremy Mcleod Architects, because the one thing I know is that this isn't about me. And the one thing that I did know back then was that over time, if we could get the formula right at Breathe, that it wouldn't belong to me, that it would belong to everyone at Breathe, which is what we've done at the moment. We've built an employee ownership scheme so that all of our staff own Breathe. It's not just Tamara and I. The idea of Breathe was that we would do something really simple. And this may sound ironic, but when I was working on that tower in Melbourne, all the apartments over level 30, you couldn't open the windows or the doors because the wind speed is so high that it sucked the furniture out of the apartment. So you live in a sealed environment. And so for us at Breathe, it was a simple idea that everyone would live and work in a space where you could open a window and breathe fresh air. So every project that we did was this, we started with small projects. We built houses. We built them as sustainably as we could for individuals. In our entire time in practice, we've never specified a new brick. Every brick that we've specified has been recycled. So, nice houses. Well, I think they're nice. That you might think they're terrible, but they're okay. Okay, so they're competent. They're sustainable. Ruben, you'd be happy to know that they catch their water and they have solar. We worked on hospitality projects, thinking that we could have a lot of impact around the way that people engage the spaces. So we converted old warehouses, old buildings, and turned them into hospitality spaces in Melbourne. This is a place called Transformer. And we worked with the restaurant owners, not only thinking about the space and the environment involved in that space, but we also started to think about the food systems that were part of that. So Transformer is a 100% vegetarian restaurant. There's no meat served there. So some of you may know that the IPCC report came out about climate change. And at the end of that IPCC report, it talked about how do we deal with this issue of, and what we've seen today is this issue that we're using 4 planets worth of resources. And one of the major issues around climate change is methane emissions. And methane emissions are 25 times worse in the environment than carbon is. And one of the biggest sources of methane is animal agriculture. So we worked with this particular restaurateur to do 100% vegetarian, so there's no meat served here. To put that into context for you, animal agriculture is the 3rd biggest contributor of greenhouse warming after building operations and transport. And so we could have an incredible impact by simply changing the way that we eat. It's very, very simple, but for some reason it's very controversial. This place was about seasonal food. It's about simplicity, and it's about not building what you don't need to. It's this idea of sustainability through reductionism. So rather than adding technology in, it's about taking things back out. And of course, relying on vegetation and plants to do all of the heavy lifting for us. The interesting thing about this house is that we just tried to make sure that it fit within the street. I mean, it was really great to watch Ingrid's work before, thinking about this incredible library, which wasn't egotistical at all. It just sat within that kind of beautiful existing structure, and the way that it addressed the street and provided that entry, it looked like it was always meant to be there. And that's our approach. It's not about building some big, tall icon to ourselves. It's about trying to fit in with our context. And again, we heard Manuel talking about this idea about context, heritage, history, and how do we tie in with that? I mean, this is just some beautiful photos so that Han will publish it in Arc Daily for me. We did some work for a San Francisco tech office. So they worked in Silicon Valley, and they took us to San Francisco and they showed us the Google headquarters, the Dropbox headquarters, where there's lots of technology. And they want to talk about staff retention and how do they engage their staff. But when we actually got down to it, what we found with their staff when we spoke to them was that they were constantly plugged in, constantly switched on. And what they actually needed was some respite from technology. And so we did this office for them in a heritage building in Melbourne. And again, it was really about kind of building less. So no big computer screens. It was actually just about putting, thousands and thousands of plants inside their office using natural recycled timber and connecting the people at Slack back with their humanity, back with nature. These tables here are made from the offcuts of the recycled floorboards. So it's this idea of human craft, because what these people do as part of their work, while it's a very, very slick communications application, it's actually crafted by thousands of human minds working together to write little pieces of code to bring it all together. We worked within the existing structure. So there was some old brewery silos there, some concrete silos. And so we just made everything fit. And lots of plants. And the funny thing in Melbourne, where I live, is that everyone thinks that you can't grow plants inside. I mean, it's interesting because you can. We do houses for individuals or families. As a practice, we tried to tailor the housing work that we did for people that had values alignment for us. So we don't do big glass houses on cliff tops with a car park garage for 8 cars. It doesn't matter if someone wants to make that, if they want to put a 25 kilowatt array on the top of that roof, if they want to put 100,000 litres of rainwater, if that big house is for one couple, then we don't engage in that because we don't think that's a sustainable way to live. So we choose our clients as much as they choose us. So we work with, for example, some of our clients house refugees. So we did that project for them. One of our clients works with superannuation companies to get them to take their money out of oil, out of gas, out of coal, and instead to invest in wind and into solar. And we work with those clients. This is, what Australia looks like outside of the city. This house is made of 3 pavilions. So one pavilion is for sleeping, one pavilion is for living, and one pavilion is for bathing. And you walk outside each of those pavilions and you're connected in a very real way with the outside air. And so Melbourne is it's a temperate climate, but it can be cold in winter, so 0 degrees Celsius, and it can be hot in summer, 47 degrees Celsius. But in the shoulder months, for about 9 months a year, it's very, very nice. This house sits between a sandstone cliff and a stand of eucalypt trees. And those type of eucalypt trees are called ironbark. And they're called ironbark because the tree is very, very dense, very, very strong. And this house, the way that it opens to that ironbark forest is that it's clad in natural ironbark. And the interesting thing about ironbark is that it doesn't rot. It lasts forever. It never needs to be painted or oiled. And then we have some rammed earth, which is made from local clay, and that rammed earth references the sandstone cliffs adjacent to this house. And that's my dog in the photo. We worked on a hotel, and the interesting thing about the hotel was how do you bring sustainability into a hotel? And so the issue for us was talking to these people about, or the owners about the existing building, and how do we respond to the existing context. So this is in Sydney, and there's a heritage context there. And the City of Sydney asked us to make the top of the hotel invisible, to set it back, push it back 10 metres so that you can't see it. Instead, we spoke to the City of Sydney's heritage architect, the urban designers, and said that perhaps rather than building an 11-storey hotel set back from the facade, we could build a 5-storey hotel built on the facade line that engages with the street and talks about the adjacent heritage of this building, or the heritage precinct that this building exists within, and the cultural heritage of this site, not just the built heritage. This hotel is called Paramount House Hotel because the building was part of the offices of Paramount Film Studios in the 1930s, and it was next to the 20th Century Fox Film Studios in the 1930s. Our response, this copper chevron cladding, talks about this idea of the golden age of cinema in this area. And as part of this overall building complex, Paramount House in Sydney, there is actually a cinema that's gone in downstairs called Golden Age Cinema, a hotel, a yoga studio, some coffee, of course, a wine bar, some offices. So it's lots of things all happening simultaneously in the same building. But whenever we made an incision into this building, we exposed what was there before. So you could see the history of the building before. This is the hotel lobby. These are the rooms. So the old structure, the timber structure that existed in this hotel, drives up through each room. So there's, it's a tapering site. So it's a wedge-shaped site. And there's 29 rooms across 5 levels in here, and no 2 rooms are the same. And I'm not saying that's good from an efficiency point of view. It's actually kind of stupid from an architectural point of view. But from a heritage point of view, it makes sense. And from an engagement point of view, if you stay in this hotel, you get a different experience every time you go. It was this idea about exposing what was there. A lot of the simple decisions we make around sustainability, it's about taking things out. So the tapware that we have here is raw brass. So we talked to the tapware manufacturer before it gets taken off the production line, wrapped in plastic, shipped to the chrome platers, chrome plated, taken off the chrome plating line, repackaged, shipped back to the tapware company, repackaged and then sent out again. So we take out all of these lines of packaging and shipping through that. Also, raw brass patinas beautifully over time, whereas chrome or a coated or a plated surface scratches and gets worse over time. So the idea is that this hotel gets better over time. Today. Didn't take me long to do. We should be out of here in no time, everyone. I'm going to talk about Australia and Australia's context in which we operate. It's called the lucky country in Australia. Has anyone heard that? Yeah, the lucky country. So it is. We've had 28 years of uninterrupted economic growth. We're the wealthiest country per capita in the world, largely because of our real estate. But in the past 40 years, we've had a 25% decrease in home ownership. So what that means is that if you're 35 years or under in Australia, actually, let me take a step back. When my dad bought his house, when my father and mother bought their house, the cost of their house was 2 times their annual salary. So they were baby boomers. I'm a Gen X. When I bought my house, the cost of my house was 4 times my annual salary. So it was harder for me, but I made it work. For my children now, who are aged under 35, if they would like to buy a house in Australia, it's 8 times their annual salary in Melbourne and 10 times their annual salary in Sydney, which means that anyone aged under 35 who doesn't come from wealthy parents cannot afford to buy a house in Melbourne or Sydney. It's simply impossible. At the same time, since 2006, the top 20% of Australians have increased their number of homes that they own. So now 20% of Australians own 2 or more homes, and 5% of Australians own 5 or more homes, which they rent out to the 35-year and under cohort. The problem with this is that think about an entire generation who cannot afford their own housing. Think about that when they age and they have no housing security. What happens to our society? It's a total societal breakdown. And interestingly, after the last 28 years of uninterrupted economic growth, in the wealthiest country in the world, we have 115,000 homeless people at the last census count. It doesn't make any sense to me. So if you come to Melbourne or Sydney, you will see people sleeping in tents or sleeping in sleeping bags and sleeping on the street. We have the highest greenhouse emissions per person in the world because we're the lucky country, right? Our Prime Minister recently took a piece of coal into Parliament to show everyone what the solution to our energy pricing was. There is photos of our Prime Minister holding coal as the new solution. So we were faced with a choice as a practice. We could keep on building nice houses for people, nice restaurants, having some impact, reducing individuals' energy, reducing individuals' carbon emissions. But we thought that we could try to do more. So our choice was to do nothing, get a nice job, maybe buy a second house, come on some holidays to KL, or B, do something. And we chose to do something. And we chose to do something in an area that we thought that we were good at, that we could have the most impact in. And for us to make that change, we had to take a risk. We had to have a leap of faith, and we had to think that we wouldn't be on our own. We embarked on a project called the Commons. So you saw a different Commons to Twitty's presentation in Thailand. And I hate to say that Twitty's presentation, her Commons is better than my Commons. But I'll tell you about my Commons anyway. But my Commons was before her Commons. The idea of the Commons was that we'd had a federal election at that point in time, and people were talking about climate change. Australians had finally realised that climate change was real. Did you see Martin's presentation when he said that 95% of the Chinese population believe that climate change is man-made? Right, that's an incredibly well-educated population. So in the United States, it's about 50% of the population believe that climate change is man-made, and in Australia it's about 70%. The thing is that climate change isn't opinion, it's fact. And so we thought that it was time to talk about climate change, talk about housing, and we wanted to build a prototype. We wanted to build a carbon neutral housing solution, something that was carbon neutral or carbon free. We wanted to decouple car ownership from home ownership, so we wanted to make it car free. We wanted to focus on community, so bringing all different types of the community together. So we wanted to strengthen community through that. And we wanted to make it affordable so that everyone could access housing. And we were told that you can't do sustainability and you can't do affordability simultaneously, that those two things are mutually exclusive. You can do one or the other, but you cannot do both. And so we embarked on a project to prove that you could in fact do both things. And the idea was that we would then use this as a prototype to educate other people in the industry, to ideally get the industry, the housing, the development industry, to change the way that they did it. The government, perhaps. So this is the Commons. It's on Florence Street, Brunswick. It's next to a train station, next to a bike path, next to a bus line, and next to our light rail, the tram system in Melbourne. It's incredibly well located. It used to be, there was a building there made from brick, and the brick that you see here is that brick reused. So from 1950s, we reused all of those bricks. In Melbourne, to build an apartment building like this, it needs to be a minimum of five-star energy rating. So it's called our NatHERS, our National Energy Rating System. This is minimum 7.5 stars. So we made it better. We tried to take all of the gas out of the building. We tried to make it incredibly efficient. We looked at this idea about sustainability and affordability simultaneously, and fundamentally it was a sustainability of reductionism. It was, who said it earlier today? Was it Crystal that said it to me today? It was about a sustainability, after Thomas's talk, Crystal said to me, it was about need, not want. So everyone saw Thomas's talk today, right? And so again, for us, I think, like you, Crystal, this was an architecture of need, not want. So we took out the car parking. Because if you're aged under 35 in Melbourne, the chances are 30% of the population don't own a car. They don't have a licence. They don't want to pay $40,000 for a car parking space. They don't want to pay 10% of the house, the price of housing for a car parking space. Instead, we looked at examples in the Netherlands and put in higher bike parking ratios instead. The planning scheme for this building said that we needed 29 cars and 5 bikes. Instead, we took out all the cars and put in 72 bikes. So we had the highest bicycle ratio to apartments in the country. We took out the individual laundries because that's what Gaudi had done on Casa Batlló and Casa Miller. And instead, we put in a rooftop garden. I'd love to say that our rooftop garden was as nice as Gaudi's. It's not. But it's this incredible space where people come together. So in this building of 24 apartments, 51 adults, 4 babies, 6 dogs, everyone comes together to wash their clothes together in the rooftop laundry. And it doesn't matter whether you're an architect or a school teacher or a CEO. You know, we're all washing our socks and our underwear together. It's a very egalitarian space. And even if you're introverted, you still have to wash your clothes, right? So even the introverts then have to talk to everyone else. And so after you've lived in this building for about, 3 weeks, you've met everyone, if you wash your clothes regularly. And so then you get to know people. And it's one of the simplest moves and one of the most successful moves, I would say, in helping build community. So generally, every apartment in Melbourne has its own laundry. This was seen as revolutionary. For all of the Europeans here, you'd be laughing at me. There's no air conditioning. So in Melbourne, again, this was the first apartment building since 1995 not to have air conditioning installed in it. Instead, we just designed it to respond to its climate. So we shaded the glazing in the summer and we let the winter sun in. We cross-ventilate the apartments and we insulate it incredibly well. We took out all the chrome and we took out all the ceramic tiles. So there is a problem with tiles. Let's talk about tiles, everyone. So tiles are quarried. So in Australia, we're a long way from everywhere. We've stopped manufacturing tiles in Australia, so now they're quarried in Italy or Spain or Mexico or China or now Vietnam. They quarry the clay, they fire it. So there's lots of energy in that, and then they glaze it and they refire it, so there's more energy in that. And then they're very heavy, and then they ship them halfway around the world. There's all these carbon miles, embodied energy wrapped in those tiles. Then we stick them on the wall with generally a toxic glue. And there's about a litre of toxic glue per square metre of tiles. And about 17% of the wall area is left open. And then you fill it with a porous product called grout, which is perfect for growing mould in. And then everyone cleans that mould with bleach. And that chemical then gets flushed into our water system. And you do that about every month. for the rest of the building's life. So instead, we just take the tiles out. We take out the ceilings so that we get higher ceilings, and we expose the thermal mass. And so what we have in Melbourne is a big shift in our temperatures. So we have, in summer, it's called the diurnal shift. So we get high daytime temperatures and low nighttime temperatures. And when we expose all of our thermal mass throughout the building, it takes the peaks and the troughs out. It's like a wine cellar. So it's because it's very well insulated from outside. And we learned lots out of this process. So we learned a lot about architecture, but we also learned a lot about finance. So we tried to fund this ourselves. So Tamara and myself, so my wife and I and 6 other architects put in our own money to develop this project. We wanted to build it as a prototype. In the middle of that, the financial crisis finally washed over to Australia and we lost our funding. And we had to sell the project to an impact investor, someone that would believe in the project and deliver on what we'd started. And it became very challenging working with them over time. And what we learnt is that this building won the 2014 National Award for Housing, and it won the 2014 National Award for Sustainability. But what we learned out of this is that this building is not that iconic. It's not incredible from an architectural point of view. But what's great about it is the people that live there are happy. The people that live there have built community. The people that live there have stayed and they want to stay there. Tamara and I moved into this building so that I could measure temperature data, that I could measure the waste, how much waste is generated from residents in this building, so I could find out what it was like to live in a building with a shared laundry and what it's like to live without a car. Tamara agreed to live in there with me for 18 months. We've now been there for 5.5 years and we have no intention of leaving, unless we do another one like this. What we learned was that decision makers set the goalposts. And does anyone know who the decision makers are? Who do you think the decision makers are? Everyone but the architect. Yeah. So Manuel's right. In the housing delivery system in Melbourne, the architect sits at the bottom of the food chain. At the very top is the property developer. Underneath there is the real estate agent, and then the marketing team. The architect down here, and the architect is given all the responsibility of managing the subconsultants, but has very little say in how the project actually gets delivered. And that's, it's free market, right? And the property development, I got into architecture so I could build housing for people. But what I found working for property developers was that property development is about making profit, not about making housing. The byproduct of that industry is apartments, and some people call it housing. And that if the system is broken, perhaps we need to use our design skills to design a new system. And so that's what we embarked on. The frustrating thing for us with the Commons was that we built this prototype and we opened it up for public tours. For 18 months, we had people touring from all over the country to come and see the building and how it worked and understand the finances behind it. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to see property developers take this model and understand this link between kind of sustainability of reductionism and affordability, and this idea about community and the fact that people wanted to live in a place with community. The interesting thing about the Commons is that after the global financial crisis, no one could sell apartments anywhere in Melbourne except in the Commons. So people were craving community. There's incredible latent demand. We opened the building up 1 July, which is our winter, and we had over 1,000 people come through the building to see how it worked. We embarked then on designing a new system, because if the industry wasn't going to deliver a new system for us, so wasn't going to embark on changing what they'd always been doing. And so in Melbourne, 85% of apartments are owned by investors. There's lots of Malaysian property developers in Melbourne. There's lots of investment apartments in Melbourne, but only 15% of apartments are owned by people that actually choose to live in them. The rest are owned by investors and rented out to Melburnians for as much as possible. So it's about profit, not about housing. And our government gave over housing as a responsibility to the private market to private developers in the 1980s. And they said, this is no longer our problem. The free market can decide how housing is delivered. And we have 115,000 homeless people. So that model doesn't work. We embarked on designing a system that could be replicated, that we could deliver a triple bottom line housing outcome. And the triple bottom line for us is about ecological sustainability, social sustainability. So one of the big problems that we have in Melbourne at the moment is that we have incredibly tall towers in the city. And I don't care whether you build your tower out of timber. If you build a tower, it is unsustainable. Again, we all saw Martin's presentation the other day about energy consumed. So if you think about greenhouse gas emissions, according to Martin's stats, 50% of greenhouse gas emissions are provided by buildings. And of that, nearly all of those emissions are associated with building operations, not with construction. So yes, we need to reduce the amount of embodied energy and carbon in our buildings, but we also need to think about their operation. And part of that is making sure that they're the right size. So we wanted to deliver on ecological sustainability. We also wanted to deliver on community. So one of the problems in Melbourne is that if you can't afford to live in a tower, then you live at the city's edges and you take, it's not as bad as Mexico City, but it does take an hour and 15 minutes sometimes for nurses that work in the city's hospitals to commute to and from work. Melbourne is the 4th biggest city east to west in the world, and there's 5.5 million people there. It's this incredible kind of sprawling mess. We've built over 40% of our farming land. So now we don't have enough food to feed Australians, so now we import food from China, from New Zealand, from Asia, even from America. So we have no food security going forward. And then we want to be able to deliver on this idea of financial sustainability. So how do we make it financially sustainable for all people living in there? And how do we make it financially sustainable for the development and the housing industry so that they want to reinvest in this to make it scalable, to make it replicable? So we needed to get all three of those things right. And the last one, the finance, has been the thing that we've been focusing on because we want to make sure that we can get the money to make this thing scale. So we started on, our first model was this idea about the democratisation of capital, about taking the developer out of the equation altogether and instead crowdfunding the equity through small-scale investment. And instead, letting the architect talk directly to the purchasers, the people that would live there, the residents, about what it is that they need. Not what they want, but what they need. And then how do we deliver that affordably for them? So do they have dogs? Do they need a place to walk their dog on the roof? Do they have kids? Do they need a place for their kids to play? Are they older? Are they disabled? What exactly do they need? So instead, we ballot the apartments early, and the architect engages with the resident group to inform the design. In Germany, it's a simple model in Germany called Baugruppen. It's existed there for a long time. There's been financial reasons and legal reasons to make it difficult to do this in Australia. When we started this, we had 11 people on a wait list when we started work on the Commons. So when we built the first Commons, it really was a leap of faith. Did anyone actually want to live there? Could we actually sell it? When we finished the Commons, people started writing to us and said, could you do it again? And then we started work on Nightingale 1. There's now 8,000 people on a waiting list for us to build apartments for them. And I'm going to explain part of the reason of that, which is about this idea of financial efficiency. So this is the value to purchasers. This is how much a standard apartment would cost. This is how much a Nightingale apartment would cost. And the difference on Nightingale 1 was about $100,000. So it was about 20% under market. So part of the reason that we have a long wait list is that we're selling apartments at $100,000 under market. I'll quickly explain how that works. So we buy our land at the same price as a property developer. We pay our architects and our consultants the same that a property developer would. We don't employ a marketing team to come up with a... Does it happen here when a marketing brochure is done for an apartment building, they photograph like a nice coffee and some people doing yoga in the park and stuff like that, and they give the building a nice name. You've seen that? Yeah? Yeah, okay, cool. So we don't employ them. Do you see that the property developers here, do they build a display suite? And the display suite's really big. It's got beautiful furniture in it, really nice light, and there's someone making coffee. Does that happen here? Yeah, okay, that happens here. So we don't do that. Do you have people here called real estate agents? Do they wear shiny shoes, nice suits, drive expensive cars? So the interesting thing for us is that real estate agents get paid on a percentage of the revenue of the building. Architects get paid on a percentage of the cost of the building. So in Australia, real estate agents get So in Australia, real estate agents get paid the same as the architects to sell a building, and if the architect is really good and really does their job, you know, I've had real estate agents tell me how happy they are that they've been able to sell the whole building in 3 weeks. My team's been working on it for 3.5 years. I've got the best architects in the country, and this knucklehead in a suit with shiny shoes. The thing is, you don't need this because we have this thing called the internet. The internet enables us to communicate directly what it is that we're trying to say without all of these people sticking themselves in the middle. When we take the marketing team out of Nightingale 1, so Nightingale 1 was a $10 million project. We took the marketing team out and saved $75,000. We took the display suite out and we saved $200,000. We took the real estate agent out and we took out $320,000. By taking them out, we reduced the cost of housing to these people here by about $22,000 each. So it makes it easier to sell without them in it. The other thing is that I don't know whether you have this issue in KL, but in Australia, no one trusts real estate agents. You got that problem here? Everyone hates buying property from a real estate agent. What we do instead is we provide information, accurate, honest information to purchasers through a series of information nights. And what we say to our residents is, ballot and buy an apartment or don't. So we're not attached to selling, because if they don't want us or they don't want to build that building, then we won't build it, it's okay. But what we find is because we provide them with information openly and honestly, so we tell them all the great things about the building, all the great things about the site, and we tell them all the not so great things about the building and all the not so great things about the site, that the area they're buying in might be an area of urban change, and that over time it might be have lots of building work around there. But we tell them honestly. And what we're finding is that people have an incredible amount of trust in what we do as a result of that. They trust us, and so as a result, we can now deal directly with them. Our construction cost actually costs the same as a developer model. So in Nightingale 1, we don't have a car park, a basement. We don't have air conditioning. So you would think that our construction costs should be cheaper, but our insulation is better. We put a beautiful rooftop garden on. We put the best double glazing and triple glazing that money can buy in. So we don't actually build for any cheaper. And importantly, we don't try to push the price down on the builder. What we try to do is to get a fair and reasonable price. We need our builders to be paid fairly so that they'll come back and build with us again, and that they'll give us a quality project at the end. So it's a different value proposition. So Nightingale 1, I'll show you quickly. Remember, it's not about the building, but it's about the system. But I'll show you what the building looks like, so you can see how it converts. It's not, you know, an iconic piece of architecture. It's very simple. But you can see that it engages with the street down here. As architects driving this, we can think about broader issues around social justice, around engagement with the street. These tenants in here, we rent that to them for $100 a week. They're an organisation called Home One, and they train homeless people in hospitality. And at the same time they're training them, they subsidise their housing. So they take them from the street, they train them in hospitality, and they transition them from homelessness into the workplace and into full-time accommodation. There's an architect down there, Branch Studio, and these architects live upstairs. And we thought it was important that, that they could live and work close by, because these architects had a young child. And they also gave birth to their first child on the floor of their apartment recently. So there was actually a baby being born inside this building about 6 months ago. This little parklet down here is a kind of urban interaction with these residents here and the residents from the commons across the road, talking between themselves. Neither of them have cars coming into the building, so there's no cars at the front of the street. They spoke to the local government, the local council, who agreed to close the street. And then over time, they will pull up all the asphalt and replace the street with grass and trees. So it's kind of this really kind of, important changes to the way that our cities manifest. That's the train, and then that's the bike path in behind there, through there. This is a display suite of the real estate agent next door. They've been trying to sell their apartments for 2.5 years. This is about, it's very interesting. So they can't sell. Nightingale 1 opens up to the community during the day. So again, one of the things that has happened within our society is that the council or the government now doesn't like to provide public toilets because they need to be cleaned, they're expensive. So Nightingale 1 opens up during the day to create this public lane. And so people can come through and use the space inside, and there's a disabled toilet, there's a disabled shower, and there's a toilet in there. So people working downstairs can all use that, the cafe can use it, but there's actually a homeless woman that comes here and showers here every Thursday. It was interesting the other day when Han said that one of the questions that someone asked Twitty about the commons in Thailand was that, what about the homeless people coming to sleep in there? I think what Han was trying to say through that was perhaps it's a weird question to ask, right? Because homeless people are just like you and I. It's just that perhaps something's happened in their life that's derailed their life. And perhaps what they need is a helping hand, a hand up, rather than being kept out by a fence. So I think that if a homeless person can go in and sleep at the commons, good on you, Twitty. I think that's great. If a homeless person can come and shower in here, I think that's great. And what's interesting is that the people that live in this building have responded to that really well. They don't see it as a bad thing. They see it as part of their social responsibility. From a sustainability point of view, this is made from 100%. It's a shame that the Finnish people still aren't here, because it's made from 100% recycled PET bottles. So it's respun polyester. It's made from recycled bricks and local stone from Melbourne, where we live. And then everything else is about, it's just exposing what's there and curating the things that we need, the water meters, the fire services. The stairs are open and simple. The signage is just painted on by hand. It's not vinyl or perspex or plastic stuck on. This is someone's apartment, and the floors are made from recycled timber, and they're nailed, no glue, which means that sometimes the floor squeaks. The floor is finished with the wax coating with 0 VOCs. So yeah, sometimes the floor squeaks, but this floor won't give you cancer. This floor ages gracefully over time. And if you scratch it, if you drag a piano across this, you can just get some more wax with a cloth and rub it on. It's imperfect, it's simple, and it's beautiful. And the interesting thing is that no one complains about the squeaking floor. They love it because they say it feels like a house. The bathrooms with no tiles. So does everyone in Malaysia like tiles? Yeah? In Melbourne, everyone loves tiles. But it's okay, you can do it without tiles. The door furniture is raw brass, pulled off the production line before going to the chrome platers or the electroplaters. The bench top is recycled timber. The basin is made locally by an artisan. It's just made out of concrete locally. This is the rooftop. I mean, this might not be that impressive in Malaysia, but in Melbourne, no one does green rooftops. So in Melbourne, this is important. We have a big issue with the urban heat island effect in Melbourne. So remember I said that sometimes it gets to 47 degrees in Melbourne? With the urban heat island effect, more and more concrete, more and more asphalt, more and more buildings means that the city starts to store heat. And so where we live near here, last summer, the government released thermal imaging camera data on this area, and it was 62 degrees on the street in summer. The one thing that stops that is canopy trees and rooftop gardens. Canopy trees are best, actually. Some of the residents. So we deliver triple bottom line housing. And if we can't do all three of those things, we think it's a failure. So remember, what we're talking about is ecological sustainability, social sustainability, and financial sustainability. The way that we talk about financial sustainability is that we source equity from impact investors or from developers. And what we say is you can still get a return on your money, but you can't get 20% per annum, or you can't get 25% per annum, or you can't get 30% per annum. But we cap it at 15% per annum. If we can get it cheaper, that's great. So if anyone here has lots and lots and lots of money, and you want to invest in housing, and you're happy to take money at less than 15% per annum, maybe 7% per annum would be great, come and speak to me later, because you will have a direct impact on the cost of housing at the other end. And so what we do is, remember that graph that we showed you? So the interesting thing is that the cheaper you make the housing, the easier it is to sell. And the easier it is to sell, the more you de-risk the project. And so if you can de-risk the project, it means that the money should cost you less. So it should be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we do give out a financial return. We just cap how much that return is, so that the goal is housing with a fair and reasonable return, rather than the goal being profit. We focus on housing for people. We ballot the apartments early. So we literally have information nights. Everyone puts their preferences of which housing they want in there. We draw out the names, and the first 20 or 25 people that come off that are the ones that get allocated. Those people then come, meet all the architects, talk about what it is that they need specifically. We make some changes to the building to meet them. We don't change everything. We standardise it, right? It's not 20 bespoke homes, but we find out what the commonalities are, and then we bring them through site about once every 6 weeks, so they can see their homes being built, and they build community with each other before they move in. By the time they move in, they already know each other. There's no awkward silence in the lift, hopefully. We deliver housing at cost, so whatever the cost of that equity is, works out to be the cost of the housing project. At the end of Nightingale 1, we have a construction contingency in the project, and at the end of the project, we didn't spend all of the construction contingency. We paid back all of the investors, the money that they invested, so they got all their money, and we still had $109,000 left. So we gave the $109,000 back to the residents that had bought in. That doesn't happen very often, right? But because for us, the driver wasn't about delivering profit, we had no need for that money. Everyone got paid fairly, and the residents got the money, the leftover money, back at the end. All of our projects are carbon neutral. So they're all minimum 7.5 stars. They all have no gas plumbed into them. They're 100% electric. They have as much solar as possible on the roof. And we buy in 100% green power, which has no carbon associated with it. So we only buy in 100% renewables into the building. We buy that from an energy generator, so a partner, and we buy that at bulk. We have a long contract on that, and we pass on that bulk rate to our residents. So our residents get the cheapest power in Melbourne, and they have no carbon emissions associated with it. So it's actually cheaper to live sustainably. And then Nightingale Housing is an organisation that we established to be able to take this financial model, to be able to share it with other architects around the country initially, but perhaps it needs to be shared with other countries, other architects around the world, to be able to deliver housing. So Nightingale Housing was established to be able to scale this idea. There's this idea of efficiency that permeates through everything that we do. So the Nightingale Housing office, this is our meeting room downstairs. So the Nightingale Housing office is used by residents on the weekend. used by the cafe for events and functions. So it's used by Nightingale Housing during the week, and then it's used by other organisations. So it's used like 16 hours a day. We have 100% green power, and then we have productive gardens on the roof. Yeah, so I mean, it's not like, you know, Kim and Ruben's work, but it's this issue around food security. Yeah, and again, you know, Martin spoke about bees. So every Nightingale building has bees on the roof. Not because we want to generate heaps and heaps of honey, but because if the world's bee populations die because of pesticides and glyphosate, we will stop living as a species 4 years after that because our plants won't be able to be pollinated. I mean, that's how critical bees are in the ecosystem for us to survive. So we do simple things like put bees on the roof of every building, and we do actually get honey off them. A lot of the speakers that you've heard here have talked about their roles with universities and education. You know, a lot of them come here to share their ideas with you because they want the ability to be able to share their ideas so that they can actually be spread. So we run Nightingale Night School at Melbourne University. So for final year thesis students, we run a 16-week project teaching architects how to understand the finances of development, how to understand the finance sector, and how to build, essentially, projects like the Nightingale Model. So we've got now a series of Nightingale alumni students, you know, working at Breathe Architecture, working at Nightingale, working within the housing and development industry in Melbourne, taking these ideas and adapting them and making them better over time. And so it's good that we all share our IP around this. The thing for us is that all of this is possible through collaboration. So for us, we shared that IP with other architects, and the first project was funded by 6 other architects. So when we raised that crowdfunded equity, 6 of those 30 investors that came in were some of Melbourne's leading architects. And so then we asked each of those leading architects to go on and start their own project. And then we've reinvested back in with them. So Nightingale 2 by 6 Degrees Architects finishes next month, and it looks incredible. It's right next to a train station. Nightingale 3 by Andrew Maynard at Austin Maynard Architects starts construction in October. Nightingale Brunswick East, that finishes in September this year. Nightingale Ballarat, and this is an example of Nightingale going to a regional city, where we're engaging with the regional communities to see if this is what they want there. Nightingale Evergreen by Claire Cousins Architects. So Lillian, you should know that Claire Cousins is the president of the Institute of Architects, or was our immediate past president of the Institute of Architects, and she's now leading a Nightingale project. So it starts at the top. Nightingale Park Life, another project by Austin Maynard Architects. The interesting thing about, I'll talk about Nightingale Village lastly. And Sky House, this is the latest Breathe Architecture's Nightingale project. And the interesting thing about Sky House is that we've looked at how do we take that Nightingale model and how do we make it better. And we've taken that all the way through Nightingale Village. So Nightingale Village is, I guess, the latest Nightingale project for us. And we've taken, we bought one site that we carved up into 7 sites. And then we got 7 of Melbourne's leading architects to build a building on each of those. We asked ourselves, what can we do better in Nightingale? And so we have included in this building 20% affordable housing. So, and again, for the Europeans, please don't judge me, but in Melbourne, or in fact in Australia, there is no requirement for affordable housing. So you can build 100% development and no provision for affordable housing. If I do housing in London, if I do housing in New York, there is a requirement for an affordable housing quota. So in Nightingale Village, we put 20% affordable housing in there. Then we pre-allocated 20% to key community contributors, people like nurses, people that work in early childhood, Indigenous Australians, people with a disability, people that work in arts and culture, people that work for not-for-profits or NGOs that don't get paid enough to justify the great work that they do or the critical work that they do within our society. So we pre-allocate to them. And then lastly, we allocate we ballot to the larger market. Nightingale Village has 203 apartments across 6 buildings. So we started with 7 buildings, and then the local council got quite excited about what we were doing, and they bought all of the sites to the north of Nightingale Village. They bought one of our sites back office, and they're demolishing all of those old warehouses in this urban area and turning it into a park. It's the first time this local government has acquired area for parkland since 1914. So they've seen this as an opportunity to partner with us to deliver better urban outcomes. There's shared car park infrastructure for 15 car share cars and electric scooters. There's no privately owned car spaces in this building, but there's bike parking for 450 bikes. The entire village is carbon neutral, and the street, again, is having the asphalt pulled up and replaced with grass and trees. But in closing, I wanted to talk to you about Breathe Architecture and what it was that we embarked on. So for us, we thought that the answer was being architects and doing traditional architecture in a sustainable way. We then went on and discovered that perhaps we need to be doing more and to find the thing that we could do that we were best at, and that was housing. And so we focused on commons as a prototype. And so we embarked on the commons as a prototype, and we built that. But it didn't actually affect change. It was seen as a prototype, as an outlier. And then we went to our colleagues. We collaborated with 6 great Melbourne architects, and we embarked on Nightingale 1, and we built a system. And then we openly shared that system with every other architect in the city, in the country. And there's now 12 Nightingale projects running. Nightingale Village, we've just secured $82 million in debt to build Nightingale Village. And I have to explain to you, so I'm an architect and not a finance broker. I didn't study business or finance. And I've spent the large portion of the last 6 months of my life in meeting rooms with banks, trying to explain to them how this model works and why it's de-risked. And the important thing now is that the banks in Australia see Nightingale as a legitimate housing delivery system. They see this as mainstream. They see this as something that they can lend us $82 million on. This is very important because it means when you go to do it, it'll be easy for you. The last thing I want to say is I want to ask you, what is it that you want to do? So Martin said when he started the practice with Han, they sat down and they thought about what it was that they were going to do. They wrote their manifesto, they set their agenda, and they stayed focused on that agenda. And I think that this is the opportunity, right? That for us, we know now, we have clarity at Breathe Architecture what it is that we want to do. We want to leave the world better than when we came into it. We don't want to add to climate change, we want to do our part to reduce it. And we don't honestly expect that we can solve everything, but we think that it is our duty to do some small part. And then lastly, what we learned is that we're much, much stronger together. That we're stronger with 6 architects, and now we're stronger with 33 licensed architects in Australia. But that as an organisation, I mean, look around the room here. Imagine the power that 1,000 architects and all of their practices and all of their offices and all of the builders could do together. So the question that I'd like to leave you with is, who is it that you want to be? What is it that you want to do? And are you stronger together? Thank you very much.